The wagon wheels churned up dust as they rolled past the edge of town, carrying everything Delilah Kane owned in a single trunk, and she realized that 5 years of marriage could be erased in less than an hour. Her husband's family had made their decision that morning, gathering in the parlor like a jury while she stood before them, the physician's latest examination results still fresh in everyone's minds. Barren. That single word had sealed her fate in Fort Stockton, Texas, in the year 1883, where a woman's worth was measured by her ability to bear children and continue family lines. The driver her former mother-in-law had hired stopped the wagon at the town's edge, refusing to take her any further. He dumped her trunk unceremoniously on the dusty road and turned back without a word, leaving Delilah standing alone under the merciless June sun with nowhere to go. She was 23 years old, cast out from the only home she had known since coming west from Missouri, with barely enough money in her purse to last a week. The afternoon heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, and she could feel the stares of passers-by who had undoubtedly heard the news already. Small towns had a way of spreading gossip faster than wildfire. She picked up her trunk, struggling with its weight, and began walking toward the center of Fort Stockton. Her practical mind told her she needed to find lodging first, then work, though she had no idea what kind of employment a disgraced woman could secure in a town where everyone knew her shame. The boarding house on Main Street had a vacancy sign, but when she inquired, the proprietor took one look at her and shook her head. Word had already spread. The second boarding house gave her the same treatment, and the third. By the time the sun began its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, Delilah was exhausted, humiliated, and desperate. She found herself at the edge of town again, this time near the livestock pens and the small cluster of buildings that housed ranch hands and drifters. A saloon stood on one corner, its piano music drifting through the evening air, and across from it was a modest building with a sign that read "Room and Board, no questions asked." It was the kind of place decent women avoided, but Delilah had run out of options and pried both. The woman who answered her knock was older, perhaps 50, with kind eyes that had seen too much of the world's cruelty to judge anyone harshly. Her name was Martha, and she quoted a price that would drain Delilah's purse in 3 days, but she offered a solution. "The Silver Spur needs a cook," Martha said, gesturing toward the saloon across the way. "Owner's a fair man, pays honest wages. It is not glamorous work, but it is honest, and he does not care about your past." Delilah swallowed her remaining pride and crossed the street as the evening stars began to appear. The saloon was busier now, filled with cowboys fresh from the range, their voices loud with the relief of men who had finished a hard day's work. She made her way to the bar, where a barrel-chested man with a neat mustache was pouring drinks with practiced efficiency. Before she could speak, a commotion erupted near the door. A young cowboy, barely old enough to shave, was being shoved roughly by 2 older men. "Your money's no good here, Sanders," one of them snarled. "We know you have been watering down your cattle at our creek without permission." The young cowboy, who could not have been more than 19, stumbled backward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I paid the access fee to your boss, and you know it, Kramer. This is about something else." The situation was escalating quickly, and Delilah found herself frozen, watching as the 2 older men advanced on the younger one. The bartender moved from behind the counter, but before he could intervene, the door opened again, and a presence entered that immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. The man who walked in was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of aged whiskey. He wore the dusty clothes of someone who spent his days in the saddle, and there was a quiet confidence in the way he moved that made other men step aside. He took in the scene at a glance and positioned himself between the young cowboy and his aggressors. "Evening, Kramer," he said, his voice carrying easily despite its calm tone. "Seems like you are picking on someone half your size. That does not sit right." Kramer's face darkened. "This is none of your concern, Xander Sullivan. The boy owes us." "The boy paid his access fee," Xander replied. "I know because I was there when he did it. Now you can leave him be, or we can discuss this outside where there is more room." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Kramer and his companion exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Whatever reputation Xander Sullivan carried, it was enough to make them reconsider. They backed down with muttered curses and left the saloon, slamming the door behind them. The young cowboy exhaled shakily. "I appreciate that, Xander. I really did pay them." "I know you did, Billy. Get yourself a drink and settle your nerves." Xander turned toward the bar and found himself looking directly at Delilah. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition though they had never met before. Delilah felt her breath catch, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after her long, terrible day. Xander's expression softened, and he tipped his hat to her. "Madam," he said simply, then moved to the bar to order a drink. Delilah forced herself to focus on why she had come. The bartender returned to his post, and she approached him, keeping her voice low. "I heard you might need a cook." The bartender, who introduced himself as Tom, looked her over with a practiced eye. "Can you handle cooking for 30 to 50 men a night? Stew, bread, whatever we can serve cheap and filling." "Yes," Delilah said, though she had never cooked for more than a family dinner. But she was a quick learner, and desperation was a powerful motivator. "Start tomorrow, 5 in the morning. Wages are $1 a day plus meals." It was barely enough to survive on, but it was something. "Thank you," Delilah said, relief flooding through her. She was turning to leave when Xander's voice stopped her. "You are new in town." It was a statement, not a question. Delilah faced him, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "Is that a problem?" "No, madam, just making an observation." "Fort Stockton can be rough on newcomers, especially women on their own." "You have a place to stay?" "I do," she said, thinking of the small room Martha had shown her, barely large enough for a bed and washstand. Xander nodded slowly, as if deciding something. "If you need anything, Tom here knows how to find me. I run a ranch about 10 miles north of town, always willing to help someone in need." There was no judgment in his eyes, no prying curiosity, just a simple offer of assistance. Delilah found herself wanting to trust him, which frightened her. She had trusted her husband and his family, and look where that had led. "That is kind of you," she managed, then fled before her emotions could betray her further. That night, lying on the thin mattress in her rented room, Delilah cried for the first time since the morning's verdict. She cried for the children she would never have, for the life she had lost, for the loneliness that stretched before her like an endless desert. But when dawn came, she washed her face, pinned up her dark hair, and presented herself at the Silver Spurs kitchen, ready to work. The next weeks passed in a blur of labor. Delilah learned to make stew in enormous pots, to bake dozens of loaves of bread in the temperamental oven, to move efficiently in the cramped kitchen while the saloon buzzed with noise beyond the door. The work was exhausting, but it kept her mind occupied, and Tom was a fair employer who paid her promptly and did not ask questions. She saw Xander Sullivan several times during those weeks. He came to the saloon most evenings, often with ranch hands from his spread, and he always nodded respectfully to her if their paths crossed. He never pried, never made inappropriate comments like some of the other men did. There was a gentleness about him that seemed at odds with his rugged appearance, and Delilah found herself watching for him, though she told herself it meant nothing. One evening, about a month after her arrival, a group of women entered the saloon. This was unusual, as respectable women avoided such establishments, and Delilah recognized them immediately. They were ladies from the church auxiliary, the same social circle her former mother-in-law had belonged to. Leading them was Caroline Porter, who had once been Delilah's friend, or so she had thought. They spotted Delilah through the kitchen doorway and began whispering among themselves. Then Caroline approached, her face set in an expression of false concern that Delilah knew all too well. "Delilah Kane," Caroline said, her voice carrying through the saloon. "Or I suppose it is no longer Kane, is it? I heard you had taken employment here. How far you have fallen." Delilah felt the blood drain from her face. Every eye in the saloon was on her now. "What do you want, Caroline?" "I want nothing from you. I simply wanted to see for myself if the rumors were true. A Barren woman working in a saloon. Your poor former husband is well rid of you. What man wants a wife who cannot give him children? You are less than a woman, really, just an empty vessel." The words hit like physical blows, and Delilah gripped the doorframe to steady herself. She wanted to respond, to defend herself, but her throat had closed with humiliation and grief. Then Xander was there, rising from his table with a deliberate slowness that commanded attention. He crossed the saloon floor and positioned himself between Delilah and Caroline. "That is enough," he said, his voice quiet but carrying an edge of steel. "You have said your piece. Now leave." Caroline drew herself up indignantly. "I will not be ordered about by a common cowboy. This woman is getting exactly what she deserves." "This woman," Xander said, his voice dropping even lower, "has done nothing to deserve your cruelty. And I am not asking you to leave, madam. I am telling you, get out." The other women tugged at Caroline's arm, suddenly aware that the mood in the saloon had turned dangerous. Men who had been listening with idle curiosity now wore expressions of disapproval aimed at the church ladies. Caroline shot one last venomous look at Delilah, then allowed herself to be led away. The silence after they left was deafening. Then Tom called out, "Show is over, boys. Drink up." The normal noise gradually resumed, but Delilah was trembling so hard she had to retreat to the kitchen. She stood there, fighting tears, when Xander appeared in the doorway. "You all right?" he asked gently. "I am fine," Delilah said automatically, then let out a shaky laugh. "No, I am not fine. I am humiliated and angry and so very tired of being treated like I am less than human, because my body will not do what everyone expects it to do." The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted them. She did not know this man, had no right to burden him with her pain. But Xander did not look uncomfortable or eager to escape. Instead, he stepped further into the kitchen and leaned against the wall. "My ma could not have more children after me," he said quietly. "Complications with my birth. My pa's family said terrible things about her, questioned whether he should stay married to her. But my pa told them all to go to hell. He said he had married my ma because he loved her, not because he wanted a brood mare. They built a good life together, just the three of us. She passed 2 years ago and my pa followed 6 months later. Broken heart, I think." Delilah stared at him, something tight in her chest beginning to loosen. "I am sorry for your loss." "I am sorry for what you are going through," Xander replied, "but those women are wrong. You are not less than anyone. You are just different, and people fear difference. They lash out at what they do not understand." "That is a charitable interpretation," Delilah said bitterly. "Maybe. But I learned from my parents that life is what you make of it, not what others say it should be." My mom may not have had more babies, but our home was always full. She took in every stray animal, befriended every outcast, filled our table with lonely people who needed family. Love is not about blood. It is about choice. Delilah felt tears sliding down her cheeks despite her best efforts to contain them. I wanted children, she whispered. I wanted them so badly. And now I never will, and everyone acts like that makes me worthless. Xander pushed off from the wall and took a step closer, though he maintained a respectful distance. You are not worthless. You are hurt and grieving, and that is natural, but your worth is not tied to your womb, no matter what small-minded people say. She looked up at him through her tears and saw only sincerity in his face. Why are you being kind to me? You do not know me. Maybe I would like to, Xander said simply, if you would allow it. The question hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. Delilah knew she should refuse, should protect her battered heart from further damage. But there was something about Xander Sullivan that made her want to take a risk, to believe that not all men were like her former husband and his family. I would like that too, she heard herself say. Xander's face broke into a genuine smile, transforming his features from handsome to breathtaking. Good. Then how about tomorrow, on your day off, you let me show you my ranch? It is nothing fancy, but it is home. All right, Delilah agreed, feeling a flutter of something that might have been hope. The next morning, Xander arrived at Martha's boarding house with a gentle mare saddled and ready. Delilah had worried about what to wear, settling finally on her simplest dress and most practical boots. Xander helped her onto the horse with careful courtesy, then mounted his own stallion, and they rode out of Fort Stockton as the sun climbed higher in the endless Texas sky. The Sullivan Ranch lay in a valley with a creek running through it, providing precious water in the dry landscape. The house was modest but well-maintained, with a wide porch and flowers growing in boxes beneath the windows. A barn stood nearby, and corrals held cattle and horses. It was the kind of place that spoke of hard work and pride of ownership. This is beautiful, Delilah said sincerely as they dismounted. It is home, Xander replied, helping her down. My pa built the house for my ma, added on as they could afford it. I have been maintaining it since they passed, trying to build the herd back up. It has been hard doing it alone, but I manage. They walked around the property, Xander pointing out various features and sharing stories about his parents. Delilah found herself relaxing, laughing at his anecdotes about stubborn cattle and mischievous horses. He showed her the vegetable garden his mother had planted, now somewhat overgrown, and the workshop where his father had crafted furniture. I have kept meaning to sort through everything, Xander said as they stood in the workshop, looking at the tools hanging neatly on the walls. But it is hard. Feels like erasing them somehow. You do not have to erase them to move forward, Delilah said softly. You can honor their memory while still living your own life. Xander looked at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. You are a wise woman, Delilah Kane. Not Kane, she corrected. I have gone back to my maiden name, and I am not wise. I am just trying to survive. You are doing more than surviving, Xander said. You are rebuilding. That takes courage. They returned to the house, and Xander insisted on making her lunch. He was surprisingly competent in the kitchen, producing sandwiches and coffee with efficiency. They ate on the porch, watching the horses graze in the distance, and talked about everything and nothing. Delilah learned that Xander was 29, that he loved this land with a fierce passion, that he dreamed of building his ranch into something substantial. He learned that she had come from Missouri at 18 to marry a man her father had chosen, that she loved reading but had few books, that she missed the green hills of her childhood. You gave up a lot to come west, Xander observed. I thought I was building a new life. Delilah said. "Instead, I just traded one prison for another. My husband never loved me. He loved the idea of me, of what I could give him. When I could not provide that, he discarded me like broken equipment. Then he was a fool," Xander said bluntly, "and blind besides." Delilah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "You barely know me." "I know enough," Xander replied. "I know you are strong and resilient. I know you work harder than most men I employ. I know you have kindness in you despite everything you have been through. That is enough for me to want to know more." As the afternoon wore on, they continued talking, and Delilah realized she had not felt this comfortable with anyone in years. Xander did not judge her, did not pity her, just accepted her as she was. It was a gift more precious than gold. When the sun began its descent, Xander reluctantly suggested they head back to town. As they rode, he cleared his throat nervously. "I would like to see you again," he said. "Properly, I mean. Courting, if you would be amenable to that." Delilah's heart skipped. "Xander, I cannot give you children. If that is what you want from a wife eventually, I will only disappoint you." Xander reined in his horse and she stopped beside him. He looked at her with such earnestness that she felt her breath catch. "I want a partner," he said clearly. "Someone to build a life with, to share joys and sorrows with. Children would be a blessing if they came, but they are not the foundation of what I am looking for. My parents taught me that a good marriage is about two people choosing each other every day. That is what I want. And I think, maybe, I would like to choose you if you will let me." Delilah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from the bitter tears she had shed before. These were born of wonder and cautious hope. "I would like that," she whispered. "Very much." Xander's answering smile was radiant, and he reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. They rode the rest of the way back to Fort Stockton hand in hand, and when they parted at Martha's boarding house, Xander tipped his hat and promised to see her soon. The courtship that followed was unlike anything Delilah had experienced. Xander courted her with patience and respect, visiting her when she had free time, taking her on rides around the countryside, bringing her small gifts like wildflowers and books he thought she might enjoy. He never pushed for more than she was ready to give, content to let their relationship develop naturally. They talked about everything. Delilah shared her pain about her barrenness, about the shame and grief she carried. Xander listened without judgment, holding her when she cried, offering comfort and understanding. He shared his own struggles, the loneliness of running the ranch alone, the pressure he felt to live up to his father's legacy, the fear that he might fail. "You will not fail," Delilah told him one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "You are too determined, too hardworking." "I could use a partner," Xander said, then turned to face her. "Delilah, I know we have not been courting long, only a few months, but I know what I feel. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your courage. I love how you see the world, how you find beauty even in hardship. I want to spend my life with you if you will have me." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "Xander, are you sure? Once we marry, once people know you chose a barren woman, they will talk. They will say terrible things." "Let them talk," Xander said fiercely. "I do not care what they say. I care about you, about us, about building a life together. And if we cannot have children of our own blood, then we will fill our home with love in other ways. There are children who need families, people who need belonging. We will build something beautiful, Delilah. I promise you that." She searched his face and saw only truth there, only love and determination. "Then yes," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you." Xander pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Delilah felt something inside her that had been broken begin to heal. She had thought her life was over, but instead it was beginning anew, They married in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with only a few friends present. Tom came from the saloon, Martha from the boarding house, and a handful of Xander's ranch hands. The local preacher performed the ceremony, and if he had reservations about marrying a divorced woman, he kept them to himself. Xander had made it clear that anyone with a problem was not welcome. As Delilah stood beside Xander, pledging her life to his, she felt a peace she had never known. This was real. This was a partnership built on truth and acceptance, not on expectations and obligations. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, and Xander was tender and patient, treating her like something precious. Afterward, lying in his arms, Delilah whispered, "I never thought I could be this happy." "Get used to it," Xander murmured, kissing her forehead, "because I plan to spend every day making you happy." Delilah settled into life on the ranch with surprising ease. She took over the household duties, but Xander made it clear she was not his servant. They were partners in every sense. She helped with the horses, learned to tend the cattle, and threw herself into restoring his mother's garden. Xander, in turn, helped with cooking and cleaning, never standing on pride about what was man's work versus woman's work. The townspeople talked, as Delilah had known they would. Some refused to acknowledge her marriage, treating her like she was living in sin. Caroline Porter and her friends spread vicious rumors. But Xander faced down every insult with calm determination, and gradually, his reputation and his obvious devotion to Delilah began to shift public opinion. It helped that they were both unfailingly polite and hardworking, contributing to the community despite the snubs they received. One afternoon, about 6 months into their marriage, Delilah was in town buying supplies when she saw a commotion at the church. A woman was arguing with the preacher, her voice rising in desperation. Delilah recognized her as Sarah Mitchell, a widow who lived on the edge of town with her 3 children. Curiosity drew Delilah closer, and she heard Sarah pleading, "Please, Reverend, just a few more weeks. I will get the money together somehow. Do not send them away." "The orphanage in San Antonio has agreed to take them," the preacher said firmly. "It is for the best, Mrs. Mitchell. You cannot care for them properly on your own." "They are my children," Sarah cried. "Please, there must be another way." Delilah felt something crack open inside her chest. She thought of Xander's words about filling their home with love, about his mother taking in every stray and outcast. Before she could second-guess herself, she stepped forward. "Excuse me," she said. "I could not help overhearing. Mrs. Mitchell, what if there was another option?" Sarah turned to her with desperate, red-rimmed eyes. "What do you mean? My husband and I have a ranch with plenty of room. If you need help caring for your children, perhaps they could come stay with us for a while, just until you get back on your feet." The preacher frowned. "Mrs. Sullivan, I am not sure that is appropriate." "Why not?" Delilah asked, lifting her chin. "We have a good home and steady income. The children would be well cared for." Sarah looked torn between hope and suspicion. "Why would you do this for us? We barely know each other." "Because someone once showed me kindness when I needed it most," Delilah said simply. "Let me pay that forward." After much discussion and some initial reluctance from the preacher, it was agreed that Sarah's 3 children, 2 boys aged 8 and 10, and a girl of 6, would come stay at the Sullivan Ranch. Sarah would visit weekly and could take them back whenever she was ready. When Delilah returned home and told Xander what she had done, she held her breath, wondering if she had overstepped. But Xander just grinned and pulled her into a hug. "When do they arrive?" he asked. "Tomorrow," Delilah said. "Are you sure this is all right?" "It is more than all right," Xander replied. "It is perfect. We have so much love to give, Delilah. Let's start sharing it." The Mitchell children arrived the next day, wide-eyed and frightened. The oldest boy, James, was protective of his younger siblings, keeping them close and watching Delilah and Xander with wary suspicion. The middle child, Thomas, was quiet and withdrawn. The little girl, Emma, clutched a worn doll and would not speak at all. Delilah's heart broke for them. She showed them to the spare rooms Xander had hurriedly prepared, gave them fresh clothes, and made them a hearty dinner. The children ate like they were starving, which they probably were, and slowly began to relax. Over the following weeks, the Sullivan Ranch was transformed by the presence of children. Xander taught the boys to ride and care for the horses, giving them responsibilities that made them stand taller with pride. Delilah worked with Emma, patient and gentle, until the little girl began to talk again, first in whispers, then in full sentences. They laughed and played, learned and grew, and gradually the wariness in their eyes faded. Sarah visited every week as promised, and each time she came, she looked healthier and more at peace. She had found work at a dry goods store and was saving money, but she also saw how happy her children were at the ranch. One evening, as winter approached, Sarah sat on the porch with Delilah and Xander after the children had gone to bed. "I need to talk to you both," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I have been offered a job in Houston. It is good money, a chance to start fresh. But it is not a place for children, not where I would be living. And honestly, seeing my babies here, seeing how they have blossomed under your care, I wonder if the kindest thing would be to let them stay. Not forever," she added quickly, "but maybe for a few years until I can establish myself properly." Delilah reached for Xander's hand and he squeezed back. "We would be honored to keep them," Delilah said. "For as long as you need, they would be loved and cared for, I promise you that." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You have given me such a gift. You have given us all a gift. I will send money when I can, and I will visit as often as possible." "The money does not matter," Xander said. "Just knowing you are building a better future for yourself and for them, that is enough." So Sarah left for Houston, and the Mitchell children became fixtures at the Sullivan Ranch. Delilah discovered that she had a natural gift for mothering, despite never having carried a child of her own. She bandaged scraped knees, told bedtime stories, taught Emma to braid her hair and the boys to read better. Xander was a patient and playful father figure, firm when needed but always fair. The ranch prospered under their combined efforts. Word spread about their kindness, and other people began to seek them out. A teenage boy who had been thrown out by his father for a mistake came to work as a ranch hand and found a place to belong. An elderly man with no family spent his last months in their guest room, cared for with dignity and compassion. A pregnant girl from a neighboring town, shamed by her community, found refuge until her baby was born, and Delilah held her hand through the labor, whispering encouragement. Their home became exactly what Xander had promised, a place filled with love in all its forms. The townspeople who had once scorned Delilah began to see her differently. She was not barren, they realized. She was abundant in all the ways that truly mattered. 2 years after the Mitchell children arrived, a lawyer appeared at the ranch with news. Sarah Mitchell had died of fever in Houston. She had left a will naming Delilah and Xander as guardians for her children, along with a letter. Delilah opened it with shaking hands and read through tears. "You gave my children what I could not, a stable home and endless love. You showed them that family is not just blood but choice. Please raise them as your own. Tell them their mother loved them but knew they were better off with you. Thank you for being the answer to my prayers." That evening, after the initial shock and grief had passed, Delilah and Xander gathered the children and explained that they would be staying permanently, that they were truly a family now. Emma, now 8, climbed into Delilah's lap and said, Can we call you Ma and Pa? Delilah looked at Xander through her tears and saw her own emotions mirrored on his face. We would like that very much, she managed to say. The years that followed brought their share of challenges. Drought tested the ranch, sickness came and went. The children had their difficult moments, as all children do. But through it all, Delilah and Xander faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing season. When James turned 18, he chose to stay on the ranch, working alongside Xander to build the herd. Thomas discovered a gift for working with horses and began training them for sale. Emma grew into a bright, confident young woman who dreamed of becoming a teacher. One evening, as Delilah and Xander sat on their porch watching the sunset, much as they had on the day he proposed, Xander put his arm around her shoulders. "You ever regret it?" he asked softly. "Marrying me, taking this path?" Delilah looked at him in genuine surprise. "Never, not once." "Why would you ask that?" "Because you gave up the chance for a conventional life. You could have left Fort Stockton, started over somewhere no one knew your story. Instead, you stayed and fought for respect, took in children who were not your own, filled our home with people who needed us. And I have been blessed beyond measure because of it," Delilah said firmly. "Xander, the day you told me we would fill our home with love instead of mourning what could not be, you gave me my life back. You showed me that worth is not measured in one way, that family is not limited by blood, that love is infinite if you let it be. I have 3 incredible children who call me Ma. I have a husband who treats me as an equal partner. I have a home filled with laughter and purpose. How could I ever regret this?" Xander pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you, Delilah Sullivan, more with each passing day." "And I love you," she whispered back. As if on cue, Emma called from inside the house, asking for help with her studies. Thomas was arguing with James about something to do with a horse's training. The sounds of family, chaotic and beautiful, filled the evening air. Delilah stood, squeezing Xander's hand once before heading inside. She paused in the doorway, looking back at her husband silhouetted against the Texas sunset, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. She had been cast out for being barren, labeled as worthless and incomplete. But she had found a man who saw past society's narrow definitions, who understood that love came in many forms, who believed that a home could be filled with purpose and joy without biological children. Together, they had built something beautiful, a family bound not by blood but by choice, by commitment, by love freely given and gratefully received. Years later, when Emma graduated from teaching school and James welcomed his first child, when Thomas married a kind woman who loved horses as much as he did, Delilah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain of her first marriage had faded to a distant memory, a necessary chapter that had led her to where she belonged. She stood in her garden, now lush and thriving, surrounded by the people she loved. Xander came up beside her, his hair now streaked with gray, his face lined with years of laughter and hard work. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy," he murmured. "Completely," Delilah replied, and she was. The girl who had been cast out, declared worthless and incomplete, had become a woman of purpose and abundance. She had learned that the capacity for love was not measured by the ability to bear children, that a mother's heart could embrace any child who needed one. That family was built on intention and devotion rather than biology. The Sullivan Ranch remained a haven for years to come, a place where anyone in need could find acceptance and support. Delilah and Xander grew old together, their love a steady flame that never dimmed. They were surrounded by children and grandchildren, some by blood relation, most by bonds of choice, all equally loved. On quiet evenings when the work was done and the house finally still, Delilah would think back to that terrible day when she stood alone on the dusty road, everything she owned in a single trunk, her future seemingly destroyed. She would remember the despair, the shame, the certainty that her life was over. And then she would look at Xander, at the home they had built, at the lives they had touched, and marvel at how profoundly wrong she had been. Her life had not ended that day. It had begun. The woman she had become, the family she had created, the love she had given and received, all of it had grown from that moment of seeming catastrophe. She had been broken open, and through the cracks, light had poured in. Xander would catch her looking at him and smile, that same warm smile that had first made her believe in the possibility of happiness. And without words, they would communicate all that they had shared, all that they had built, all that they had become together. The townspeople of Fort Stockton eventually stopped gossiping about Delilah Sullivan. Instead, they spoke of her with respect, even admiration. She was the woman who had turned tragedy into triumph, who had redefined what it meant to be a mother and a wife, who had proven that love was not a finite resource, but an endless well that deepened with use. As autumn painted the Texas landscape in gold and rust, Delilah celebrated her 50th birthday surrounded by more than 30 people, all of whom considered themselves family. She looked around the table at the faces young and old, and felt a contentment so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. Xander stood and raised his glass. "To my wife," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who took a hard life and made it beautiful, who filled our home with love just as I promised her we would, who taught me that the greatest adventures come from opening your heart, not closing it. I am the luckiest man alive because you said yes all those years ago." To Delilah, everyone chorused, raising their glasses. "To all of you," Delilah replied, her voice breaking. "You are my greatest joy, my proudest achievement, every one of you." Later, as the celebration wound down and people drifted toward their homes or guest rooms, Delilah and Xander walked out to the spot where he had first proposed, where they had shared so many conversations over the years. The stars were brilliant overhead, the night air cool and sweet. "Do you remember what you said to me the night we met?" Delilah asked, leaning against Xander's solid warmth. "I said a lot of things," Xander replied with a chuckle. "You said your mother filled your home with every stray and lonely person who needed family. You said love was not about blood but about choice. You were right, Xander, about all of it." "We were both right," Xander corrected gently. "You chose to trust again when you had every reason not to. You chose to open your heart when it had been shattered. That took courage I can barely comprehend." "I chose you," Delilah said simply, "and you chose me." Everything else followed from that. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other in the midst of pain and built something extraordinary. The ranch stretched around them, land they had worked and loved, filled with memories of children raised and lives changed, of hard winters survived and abundant summers celebrated. Delilah thought about the young woman she had been, broken and ashamed, believing her worth was tied to her womb. That woman had learned a profound truth, that the capacity to love, to nurture, to create family and home and belonging had nothing to do with biology and everything to do with intention. She had been barren in body but abundant in spirit, and in the end, that was what mattered. "Thank you," she whispered to Xander. "For what?" "For seeing me when I could not see myself. For believing in us when I had stopped believing in anything. For filling our home with love instead of letting it be empty. For everything." Xander turned her to face him, cupping her face in his work-roughened hands. "You did all that too, you know. We did it together. That is what partnership means." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Delilah felt the same flutter in her chest she had felt 30 years ago when he first smiled at her. Some things never changed, and some things, she thought, should not. The years continued to pass, each bringing its own mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and challenge. But through it all, the foundation Delilah and Xander had built remained strong. Their children grew and prospered, going on to build families of their own, carrying forward the lessons of love and acceptance they had learned. James took over running the ranch when Xander's health began to fail, managing it with the same integrity and vision his adoptive father had shown. Thomas's horse training business expanded, becoming known throughout Texas. Emma opened a school that welcomed all children, regardless of their ability to pay, embodying the generosity of spirit her mother had demonstrated. When Xander passed peacefully in his sleep at 75, with Delilah holding his hand, she grieved deeply but without regret. They had lived fully, loved completely, and left the world better than they had found it. At his funeral, more than 100 people came to pay their respects, many of them sharing stories of how Xander and Delilah had changed their lives. Delilah lived another 10 years, remaining active and engaged with her sprawling family. She taught her grandchildren to garden, shared stories of the old days with anyone who would listen, and continued to offer refuge to those in need. The Sullivan Ranch remained what it had always been, a place where love was the foundation and everyone belonged. On a warm spring morning, Delilah passed away in her sleep, a smile on her face, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she had built. They laid her to rest beside Xander, under a cottonwood tree that had grown from a sapling they had planted on their first anniversary. The headstone read simply, Delilah Sullivan, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she filled the world with love. At the gathering after the funeral, Emma stood before the assembled crowd, now a gray-haired woman herself, and shared her memories. My mother, and she was my mother in every way that mattered, taught me that love is not finite. She taught me that family is what you make it, that home is where you are accepted and valued, that the greatest wealth is measured in relationships, not possessions. She was told she was worthless because she could not have children, and in response, she became mother to dozens. She was cast out by her community, and in response, she built a new community based on acceptance and compassion. That is her legacy. That is what we carry forward. The crowd murmured in agreement, and as people shared their own stories, a picture emerged of a woman who had transformed personal tragedy into communal blessing, who had refused to let society's narrow definitions limit her, who had shown that there are many ways to be complete, to be valuable, to make a difference. Years later, the Sullivan Ranch still stood, now run by James's son, but still maintaining the tradition of opening its doors to those in need. The story of Delilah and Xander Sullivan became local legend, told and retold, an example of how love could triumph over prejudice, how partnership could transform pain into purpose. In Fort Stockton, where once Delilah had been scorned and rejected, they named a community center after her, a place where families in crisis could find support and resources. The building stood across from where the old Silver Spur Saloon had been, a full-circle journey from the desperate woman who had sought employment there to the legacy of compassion she had left behind. The story of the Barren woman and the cowboy who filled their home with love became more than just their story. It became a testament to the idea that worth is not measured by conventional standards, that family transcends blood, that love is the greatest force for transformation in the world. It reminded people that sometimes the hardest moments in life are doorways to the most beautiful chapters, if only we have the courage to walk through them. And somewhere, in the way the wind moved through the cottonwoods and the sun warmed the Texas soil, the spirits of Delilah and Xander Sullivan remained, forever entwined, forever home, their love story complete and perfect in all its unconventional glory. They had proven that when society casts you out, you can build something better than what you lost. They had shown that the greatest rebellion against cruelty is relentless kindness, that the most powerful response to rejection is radical acceptance of others. Their story lived on, not in grand monuments or formal history books, but in the hearts of everyone who had been touched by their generosity, in the lives of children who found family when they thought they had none, in the example of a love built on mutual respect and shared values rather than societal expectations. It was a quiet legacy, but a profound one, rippling out through generations, changing the world one open heart at a time.